is we'll start with Kim giving her presentation on using boom cards in upper elementary. Thank you, Kim.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, I'm Kim Fields. I teach 5th grade in Massachusetts, and I'm just gonna share my screen to start. So let me do that. I'm going to start with an overview, just in case some of you don't know anything or much about boom cards. So really what I was hoping to talk about today is what a boom card is. We're going to talk about how to set up a class, how you can assign boom decks, how to differentiate with them within your classroom, and then different ways that you can use them in your classroom. So boom cards are basically digital interactive task cards. They are self-checking, which that's my most favorite thing about them. So that means that you don't actually have to correct them. They are corrected automatically as kids are going through it, playing the decks. It's my most favorite feature because students know right away whether or not they are answering work correctly. And it's a check-in feature so that if they're hearing that buzzer, which means they're wrong, they know they have to pause, do some thinking. So it's one of my favorite things. Boom cards are web-based, so that means you do need to be connected to the internet to play them. And they work in most modern browsers. You can use Chromebooks or laptops, computers. They work on a mobile phone even, iPads, and Amazon Kindle Fires. So you can play with them on that also. There is also an app. There's always an app for that. So before we start, this is an example. So I kind of wanted to give you a visual of what a boom card looked like so that you could picture it in your head before we start. So this one is a boom deck 4 volume, and it's an example of a fill in the blank. And you can see kids get that bell, which means that they were correct in how they solved the problem. And they know instantly that they are answering correctly or not, and it moves them on to the next problem. This is a different kind of deck, which has a drag and drop feature, which is just another cool feature with boom cards. So students would pick a card and drag it over to see whether or not they are correct. So that's an example of a drag and drop. It's really easy to get started with Boom. If you do not have a membership yet, they are offering a free Ultimate membership through June of 2020, which is amazing and 100% worth it. You can go right to boomlearning.com, and when you get to this screen, you can either click yes, you have an account, or no, you don't. And as soon as you hit create new account, it will bring you through the entire process of how to sign up. And once you've done that, the next thing that you're going to want to think about is what it looks like and how to set up a class. So give me 1 second to stop this share so I can log into my account and I can show you what that will look like. Hopefully you are seeing my, my teacher Boom account. So once you've set up everything, you are going to want to create a new class. So you can see I already have some classrooms in there, but once you log into your teacher section, you would hit new classroom. And then you have the option to put in students one at a time, or you can add multiple students all at the same time. This is easier, I think. So you would click on add, let me show you again, just in case you didn't see. If you do add many students, you can just put in a list. So you can do it with commas, or you can go into a new line. I'm just gonna add all my family members for fun, why not, right? So this would become my new list of students, and then you can set a default password. In my classroom, because I teach 5th grade, I just use Boom5 as our password, and then you would hit add students, and you can see you now have a new class full of students sitting in front of you. You can, or students can, change the password afterwards. I do not allow my kids to do that. I'm a little type A, I'll admit that. But I like the password to be Boom5. It's easier for me because if I get an email from a parent saying my child can't remember their password or what is their password, I just know it's Boom5. I use it all the time. So that's just a tip for you.
Kim, I just want to make a comment real quick. Because of school contracts, Boom can't help your student with their password. So if we get a request from a parent saying, I don't know my student's username or password, we tell them to come to you, the teacher.
Right. So that is why it's easier to just have one set password. And in terms of usernames, you can see if you're looking at these, there's the first name and then there's a set of numbers. You can change those if you want to, in case you come up with a really long string of numbers. It really hasn't been a problem for me, but there is an easy way to do that. You just click on the name and you can try to change it out. Like I could try Barbara R, and it's changed easily. So you do have the ability to change a password, or a username rather, pretty easily. So now that we have students in our classroom, you are going to want to have some Boom decks, and that is also really easy to do. So when you're looking up at your tab, you have classes, you have a library, and your library will be where all of the Boom decks that you have live. You can see some reports, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then you see store. So if you click on the store, there are a whole bunch of Boom decks, and you do need to sometimes purchase Boom decks. They are purchased using coins or points through the Boom store. But there's also a lot of free decks available, and you can click right on Find Free. So there's lots and lots of free content available to get started on Boom. So I'm going to say I want to filter by 5th grade, and I am going to search for division. Why not, right? So then you'll see there are all of these Boom decks. Whoops, except those aren't 0.1. So hang on, let me go back. I want to grab a free one. So it really doesn't matter. I can grab this one. And once you click on a deck, it will go into your library. So I have a lot of Boom cards in my library because I love them. My students love them. And once you've downloaded a deck, it will be in your library, and you will, just like me, become addicted and have lots of Boom decks to use with your students. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, and hopefully I'm not going too fast, is how you would assign decks to your students. So once you have decks in your library, you can assign them. So I'm going to head back to my classes, and I actually set up a sample classroom today to show you some additional features, but I'm going to go into this one that I just created with you. So you'll see a students tab. There is an assignments tab. If I go into assignments, you can see right now that there is nothing assigned to this classroom. So all you need to do is click the assignment tab there, and then you have all of the decks in your library. You can decide what you want to assign to students. So let me just move this out of the way so I can see. I'm going to assign this deck, and then I'm going to go back to right here. So you can see that that is now what they have assigned. They have one deck assigned to them. You can assign more than one deck at a time. So if I wanted to, I could also assign this one. And if I head back to students and then go into assignments again, you can see they now have 2 decks that are assigned to them. So that's an easy way to do that. That's if you want to assign for your whole entire class. But
before you move on,
yes.
I just want to do a caveat for people. We do only show students 40 decks at a time, because more than that's really, frankly, overwhelming. So if you assign more than 40, they won't see them all. So we recommend you don't assign more than 40 at one time. We eventually will have time-based assigning, but it's really easy to just add assignments and remove them. So just be frugal with how many you assign at any one time.
Yeah, I can't imagine assigning 40. I think that would overwhelm my kids too. So if you want to assign a whole class, that's how you would do that. But one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning is that I really like to use Boom for differentiation also. So I teach math workshop. I don't know how many of you do a workshop model in your classroom, but I pre-test my students, and then they are grouped based on where they need to work and kind of like what skills they need help with. So you are also able to assign decks to just certain students. And you can do that within your student tab just by clicking on this drop down arrow, and then you can say assign. So if Barbara is a student in my class and she's struggling on multiplication, I can go, and that is because I organize folders. You can organize folders for your library, but you don't necessarily have to. But if I knew that she was struggling with multiplication, I could assign just her this multiplication deck that I wanted her to do. And if I knew Molly was having a hard time working on order of operations, which we probably wouldn't truly be teaching at the same time, but just for the sense of showing you this, I can choose just this deck for her. And then when the students log in, they will see the decks that have been assigned to them. Could be a whole class deck. It might be something that you've assigned individually. And I'll show you what it looks like on the student side in a minute.
Before you go on, Kim, I just want to let Elizabeth and Ella know that that also answers their question for speech therapy, how to do individual assignments.
Great. And I am just using math for the moment because it's my favorite subject to teach, but there are Boom decks for all kinds of subjects that are out there. I use them during language arts also. There's lots of great grammar decks. There's lots of great decks for speech. There are decks about everything that you could possibly want, science, social studies. There's lots of things. I'm just focusing on math because it's my favorite. So hopefully that's okay with you. So before I move on to, I did want to say that you can use Boom cards with Google Classroom. So in my class, I use Google Classroom every day. I will put an assignment that says, you know, complete a fraction Boom deck, and then I'll put a link to just the Boom site. But I prefer to have my kids log in on Boom. It's just easier, and I think it's what I'm used to, so that's how I like to have my students do it. So they will see an assignment in Google Classroom, they click on a link, and it will bring them right to the student sign-in, which I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like.
Before you move on for a moment, Kim, I want to answer Rosario's question. So Rosario, you had asked, said you were confused about how the students you added by name showed up in your Boom class if they'd not been invited to join. So invitations to join are really a Google Classroom concern. If you're not using Google authentication, you are the controller of your classroom. We at Boom don't determine what student account should be created, you do. So Kim, if you could just click add many one more time.
Sure.
So when you want to create student accounts, you actually do it. You click add many students, and you put in the list of student names. Just pick a couple there for us. And you can set your default password at this time. There is a way to set a more individualized passwords if you wish. Go ahead and click add students there. And now those students have been created. Notice their usernames. Their usernames are not Ryan, but their usernames are Ryan.159. Not Sean, but Sean.269. All usernames have to be globally unique in our system because they're individual user accounts. And so that's why they're not their name you typed in, but their username that they will log in with is this slightly modified version, and then the password you gave them. Kim, could you quickly click print roster QR code?
Sure.
Now, if you wish to do individualized passwords, you can click that top button, print roster with password or QR code. This is going to override your others. You can also click use picture password for this classroom if you want. And once you hit, and Kim, you don't need to do this, generate new password, but you can if you want, since this is a sample classroom. When you click generate new password, it's going to overwrite all the passwords you had, and it creates individual passwords for each student. So here, each student has a unique password. To keep track of those, I recommend you keep a copy of this PDF in a safe place. So some teachers prefer Kim's approach where they have everyone has the same password. Other people, particularly therapists, might need a higher level of privacy control, so they might want individualized passwords for the students. So depending on your needs, you may need to use this method. All right, that I think should answer the question.
Okay, great. So I wanted to show you what it looks like when a student logs in. And the funny thing with Zoom is that my own face is right in the way of what I'm trying to show you. I'm just going to open an incognito window for a second so that I can go to what a student sign in would look like. So when the student comes here, they can click right on this button because they're signing in as a student. And my students, even though they have a Google Classroom account, I like them to sign in with Boom. And I'm going to put in a name. I'm going to use a password. And when they sign in, they can see that this is Trey, and he's a fake student, but he's been assigned these 2 decks that he has to do. So that's what it looks like on a student side. I think it's important to see that if you've never seen that side before, just so that you can see what the students are looking at. And then when they go to sign out, they can sign out right here. Okay, so the next thing I was thinking about is showing you just some information that teachers can gather when they're on that site. So I'm actually going to pop into this sample classroom. So I spent some of my this morning playing Boom cards so that I could have a little bit of data to show you. And when you log in, you have the opportunity to also click on this reports tab. And this is something that I think all teachers like, but as an upper elementary teacher, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. You can see how students are working and how well they have answered questions. It's something that you can use to help form your instruction for where kids might need a little bit of extra help. So when you click on that reports tab, you're going to see a message will pop up that says you need to click on at least 1 deck. So I'm just going to scroll through the multiple decks that I have, and I'm going to click this one. And if I scroll down here, you can see of these students, we have Jack, who is progressing. He's about 80% done. So you have all these circles right here. And basically what those legends are telling you is that the dark part of the circle shows progress in the current run of them playing. A green circle means that they're on in whatever run that they would be on. You can see accuracy, and you can see time that they've spent playing the cards. So Jack is about 80%. He spent about 2 minutes, and Joe's got about 93%. He was on for 1.17 minutes. And you can all see all of this data here. If I click on an individual student and I click on this deck, I can see here right away that he has some answers that are correct. He has some answers that are incorrect. So I focus when I look at this on the red sections, because that will say that's an answer this person got wrong, and it will show me what their guess was. And you can also see by clicking on the bar what that exact card was. So not only do I know that he got it wrong, I can also see what his answer was, which will help me as a teacher figure out, okay, well, what is this person doing wrong when they're solving the math?
And on that one in particular, you notice there's no blue line down below. That means the student didn't ponder at all. They just entered something.
So this is another example of one where the person got it wrong, but you can actually see the problem again. So I like to do a few different things when I'm looking at this. When I'm looking at this information, you can tell how long a student spent trying to figure it out. So there's a difference in if you can see a kid just flying through the deck with lots of wrong answers. That's one problem. You can also see if they've spent a good amount of time and they have multiple guesses. To me, that means it's probably more that they need an additional lesson or some extra help on solving a problem. You know, a conversation I might have with someone who has lots of wrong answers and not a lot of time is, you know, you need to slow down, check your work, actually do it, versus, okay, we need to sit and talk about this strategy because you're making some mistakes. Let's see if we can figure out where you're going wrong. So the data, I think, is really cool. The other thing that is amazing, and
Oh, Kim, one moment.
yes.
Before you move on, we just had someone who wanted to just show a little more slowly how you got to that data.
To the reports?
Yes, well, to the individual student card report, the one you were just.
Sure. So let me click on this one instead. So I clicked on Joe, and I'm going to click on this deck because he hasn't done anything on this one. So I'm going to click on the title, and it brings you up this bar. So anything that's green means that he has answered correctly. The red buttons will show you which cards they've gotten wrong. So you can see a card ID and what their answer was, but if you click on that, it will bring up the actual card with the answer that they gave. Is that what they wanted me to show? So
yes, that's what we needed. Thank you.
Perfect. The next thing that I think is really neat, and I'm just going to pop back to, pop back to this screen, is, let me go into my sample again. There is, and my face is again in the way, so sorry about that. I'm going to click on reports again, and I want you to notice that go live button that is right here. This is probably my favorite feature. Go live means that if I click on this button, I will actually get live updates of how students are working in the moment in the classroom. So I actually opened up my phone because there is an app for that. And I am signed in as Trey. So you can see right now that Trey doesn't have anything in this multiplication practice grid, but I'm going to go in and answer something for him. If I can get into my.
We can see some results showing up already.
And I'm just typing random numbers to show you. So as a teacher, what I like to do is keep either my phone, so my principal knows I use Boom cards and I've explained this feature to her, so I might have my phone out on my desk, and while I'm teaching small group math, I can be glancing at this and I'll know who is working, who might be needing some help, who might be struggling, and I can in the moment say, okay, I'm going to call up these 3 kids because as I'm looking at the data, I can see that they are having a hard time answering. And my phone is going just a little bit slow, so I've actually done 3 cards with wrong answers, and it will update as we're going. So right now you can see he has 0% in terms of the right answers. So I would be thinking about that and saying, all right, when I finish with this math group, I'm going to call up Trey and maybe 2 or 3 other students that are having the same problem. So this go live button is one of my favorite things that we can use in the classroom just to get a little bit more real-time data. I am using Boom cards right now with my students, even though we're on a remote learning basis, but I'm not really using the live feature because they are all doing their work at different times during the day. But when we're at school, this is something that I really love. It's my favorite feature.
Kim, can you scroll up? I want to have you point out one thing. We had a couple questions about classroom privacy. Can you hover your mouse over the not private words there, please?
if I
Under
could
the
see them.
under sample classroom next to log. You're there. So do you see where it says sign in, lock, not private,
Oh, yeah,
delete?
yeah.
Yeah. So Kim's a big user of lock, correct? You don't let your students change their names?
No, I keep them the same.
Yeah. Now, the not private, all classrooms are by default not private. If you click that, what it means is when the student signs out, they won't be returned to the classroom list where all the names appear. However, if you hand out the classroom login, when they use that to log in, they will see the roster. So if you are a therapist, don't hand out the classroom login. That's her username there, mrsfee.catjd for the sample classroom and that password. Do not hand those out. Only hand out individual usernames and passwords, and set your classroom to private. Click that private button. And then the students can't see who else is in the classroom. So for therapists in particular who have some additional privacy concerns, make sure you do that to address that. Thank you, Kim. You can continue, please.
Okay. And the other thing that I did is, again, I told you I'm very type A. I use a binder system with my students, and they have a planner, and inside their planner, we glue their password cards in. So they never see each other's usernames unless for some reason they're sharing their binder, which they wouldn't really have any need to. We keep them glued on the inside front cover. So they have the password when they're going home or when they're at school if they need it. And again, that's why I use the same password. It just makes it easier for me if a parent emails me and says my child doesn't know their password. Typically at 5th grade, that means that they don't feel like doing it at home and they're just going to say they don't know their password. And you know, it doesn't happen with all kids, but maybe one or two that just try to work the system a little bit. So having the same password just makes that easier on my end. So that's how you do the assigning for different kinds of activities. The go live, I think, like I was saying before, is definitely one of my favorite features. So I hope if you are trying it that you will be able to do that also. One other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to go back to my library, is something called a Fastplay Pin. And their Fastplay is a way of using a boom deck without tracking data. So you can assign it using just a link. So if I click this fast pin, it's going to generate a pin, and kids can go right to this website, and then they would enter this pin 23SE. So I'm going to move my face again, open up another incognito window so I can show you. This is what a fast play looks like. And it just gives kids an opportunity to use a boom deck, play all of the cards, but it's not collecting data. And there are lots of times when I don't want to be collecting data. And one of them is if I'm using boom decks for homework, I don't necessarily want to be tracking how many cards they get correct or incorrect, because there's lots of different levels of support that happens at home. Sometimes kids receive so much support that the work that they're doing isn't truly their own work. And I don't want that to be impacting what their data scores look like. I also sometimes like to let kids use the fast pin so that they can practice on a deck. And then I might say to them in class, I don't know, at the end of the week, I want them to do it kind of like a quiz. Not that I would really count it as a quiz grade, but just to kind of see how they're doing and then have one data point rather than them practicing one card multiple times with lots of data. So fast pins, I believe, last for 14 days now. I think it was 5 days at the beginning. Mary, is that right? It's now 14?
If you have a premium account, so Basic, Power, Ultimate, they do last 14 days. For starter accounts, they are 5 days.
Okay, so you can assign a fast pin just to use if you're not so worried about keeping track of those data points. So one thing I didn't mention before I left, the Fastplay Pin, I also like to use with my students if I know I'm going to be absent. And I like to do that just because when we have substitutes come in, there's all kinds of different substitutes. I'm not knocking substitutes. They're phenomenal, but sometimes a substitute teacher will give too much assistance. Sometimes somebody won't give any assistance. So I do use a Fastplay Pin if I know I'm going to be out sick also, just because I want to be tracking the data when I know what level of support the students are receiving when they're working. So the last thing before we open up for questions that I wanted to talk about are just the different ways I use them in a 5th grade classroom. So often I will use Boom cards as a whole class assignment. And I have, as I said, I use Math Workshop as my model. And one of my station rotations every day is a game station. And I tend to use digital resources for my games. So my students use Boom cards almost every day at that station. I've also used them in small groups or intervention groups. My school has a dedicated RTI block every day, and I teach intervention groups for math. So I also use Boom decks with those students. And the way that I like to use them in an intervention group situation is I might teach a lesson on Monday. When I see those students on Tuesday, I might give them a quick little dipstick assessment to see how they're doing. And then if I need to work one-on-one with a student within the intervention group, everybody else is working on a Boom deck, so I can see how they're doing while I work one-on-one with someone in my intervention group. And that really works well for me. They can be used in a center or as a station activity. Like I said, you can use them for homework. I also like to make review decks for unit assessments. So I'll send those home for students to practice before and end of the unit assessment test in science or in social studies or math even. I think it's just a nice way for them to practice. And then lastly, I sometimes use them as a movement break also. And you can do that with the Fast Pin. You can display your Boom deck up on your whiteboard. And I like to do it that way. So I put it up on my whiteboard. The kids make a line. I have a Promethean board, so it has a pen. And the first person in line will go up, answer a question, and then they'll pass it to the next person in line who answers one, and then the next person, and so on. That type of activity only really works with certain kinds of decks, though. It's better for, multiplication practice or, identifying an adjective in a sentence or something that they can do relatively quickly, but they love it. My kids love it. They line up and they're super silent. They don't want to help each other get the right answer. Not that we're like tracking who gets it right and who gets it wrong in that situation, but it's just fun. And it's an opportunity for them to get up and move around the room. So I think that brings me to the end of really how I use it in the classroom with upper elementary students. I know that Mary wanted to have time for questions.
So you have some students who just can't get to Boom Learning. That is a question for your IT group. So your IT department determines what sites students can access from their school devices, and they can fix that for you at their server. If your response to that is, oh, I have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get something approved, we do this all the time. I just got off a call earlier this morning from someone who was in Texas, and they were like, not sure we can do because this is packet you have to fill out. I'm like, I know what your packet is. Send me everything. I know how to fill it all out. And here's where you go get that other piece you need too. So we do these all the time. We're more than happy to fill them out for your school. We can often turn them around within 1 to 2 days. So long as you're fairly standard, and most of them are. So if your department needs us to fill out paperwork, don't let that be a barrier. Just send the paperwork to help@boomlearning.com and we'll take care of that for you. All right, I think we have answered all their questions. Kim, thank you so much for doing this for us. We appreciate all your help.
That was great, thank you.